its turrets.
It's a proper transformer, this ship.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's probably no area that doesn't transform almost, especially on the exterior. And again, like John said, it's just to keep with that kind of like,
just a friendly trader.
Yeah, just a friendly trader.
Peaceful.
Don't worry about me. Just going on my business, and then suddenly everything just pops out, and it's all business. So again, sort of multi-stage animation for the guns. Again, for the turret. The turret featured in the original. There was a hidden.
It was never really fully explained.
No.
There was a turret, a man turret there that you could get in and defend with, and it was in that top fin, I guess.
Yeah, and when the weaponry is unmanned, it's a lot easier. We can get away with a lot smaller spaces. Once you put a person in it, then it's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah.
And just the player experience, and it's twin gun.
Twin S5, so it's not giving you a little tickle. It's quite a big punch.
Yeah.
And even though it's only a turret, a gunner, you still got to kind of take all the consideration. You're taking in a pilot seat in terms of their visibility and everything else. And
coverage as well.
And yes, you expect to see the big guns and the silhouette and get that kind of the real feel of being in a gunner seat. But like I say, it's quite easy for it to just kind of grow in complexity quite quickly.
Yeah. So basically we've used the GN tech again to help us sort of reveal the turret, also to elevate the turret. Still, we've got multiple ideas for that, so I think we'll just have to figure that out a little further on. And then these guns look tiny in comparison, don't they?
They're still
like
sized. So these are guns that most fighters have equipped to them, but they're on these point defense turrets. So obviously the ship was big to start with. It's bigger now. It's more of a target for missiles and torpedoes, and one of the best ways we have in game to counter those is these automated point defense turrets. So Banu again, humans have these phalanx style guns that shoot down incoming threats. We'll take that and we'll use our own guns. So it's got 4 of these on the hull. So there's 2 on top near the bridge, and then I think we see the other 2 underneath. So you've sort of got your 360 degrees protection from missiles from those. And then there's an additional pair of size 4 remote turrets under the wings. These are controlled from the bridge. The bridge crew mentioned them. So yeah, it's not lacking on.
Not lacking on.
The thing is, it can carry a fair amount of cargo, and it's got its own trading floor.
It's your livelihood.
Yeah, you kind of need to make sure that.
Basically,
protect that.
Yeah. It's a bit of a TARDIS. It's a bit of a There's as people will see, there's a whole bunch of extra stuff that we've squeezed into this compared to the first one. So there's always been this feature on the Banu. It was there on the original, but it never really had a function. Some people called it the paddle, some people called it the flipper, but Chris was like, okay, it needs a reason to be there.
It is very dominant.
In
its development. So.
I'll always remember that one bit of Defender concept art where it's just there, just destroying a mountain. It flies over, just dragging it through.
So we've, it's a multifunction essentially, because one of the difficulties was at the top of that fuel scoop, is basically the entrance to the marketplace for traders and the public. So it was, there's that challenge of what it needs to look. It needs to do its job, but it also needs to look visually appealing because it's going to be the entrance. So there was, and we'll see that in a second. But it was always a bit of a tricky thing to solve. And so, again, we're seeing here as John mentioned earlier, the ship got wider and didn't actually fit on a landing pad.
Which meant we had no hangars that it would officially fit in.
We
could only ever officially land at docking stations with docking ports or on a planet's surface, which is, as a trader, you're missing out on all the places you could land to do trading. So we had to find a solution.
The funny thing is, this is the simplest of the solutions that we came up with. There's probably like 10 others that we did. Some of them were super crazy, parts just folding back on each other and all sorts of things. So, but in the end, I think, simplicity wins out.
they're not small bits of wing to move.
Yeah,
It's kind of deceptive,
I mean, there's
isn't
gaps
it?
here, and we haven't got the mesh in there,
Yeah.
but there will be. We'll work it out for you, Ben.
Yeah.
So you can see here, this is basically a shot of what is the fuel scoop, but it transforms again and becomes this pathway to the marketplace. So you'll have this, basically what this experience, again, it's kind of the red carpet treatment. You're walking up into the marketplace. It's not in this image, but we will have, or hopefully, we'll have like softs, like awnings basically, that will sort of come out as well. And so we'll have that sort of marketplace.
I think for me, this is one of the ships that really excites me because it is very different to, not a lot of the ships that we've done. And I think that sort of like initial experience, like you say, of seeing this thing kind of like come and land down, and the traders kind of inviting you in and entering into, it's very otherworldly.
Yeah.
Kind of entering up that, walking up those steps out of one of our kind of space station, like our human space stations.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's going to be kind of really exciting to kind of.
I mean,
have
the
that
idea
first
is
experience.
that as you go up those stairs, you'll have holographic visuals of products that are in the marketplace,
Yeah.
and so they will sort of pop up and just be spinning. So you'll have like, it's just that sort of shopping experience. And it's like, oh, okay, I can get that and get that, or maybe even artifacts that the traders picked up. I mean, you've got options basically. So, and then also the cargo that changed.
Cargo is a big topic. It was one of those things in the original concept, even digging out the original design brief wasn't particularly clear on, was the cargo bay internal, was it external, was it
and it
a walkable space?
And we kept it external for the first half of this development.
And then it was during a meeting where I think a bunch of us were in there with Chris, and we were all like, oh no, it's internal, and then someone else was like, oh no, it's external, and we just decided like, let's make it enclosed. We'll keep the styling of how it was in the original concept, so you have that sort of, I don't know how you want to call it, shuttering or on the outside.
Yeah, I'm struggling to actually remember it now because I'm kind of like locked into this one. But it was more that it was you saw the cargo crates, didn't you?
They were very exposed, weren't they? Yeah.
They were exposed, certainly from underneath. You could see them all.
Yeah.
They were top mounted, and they could all drop down. But that caused huge problems with the entrance case, where if they could all drop down at the same time, then you couldn't get in the ship to start with. So
we did have a solution, but this is definitely better.
Yeah. So now it's enclosed. You just have one way of dropping at the front, and then we'll see later how it's all managed inside. So you can have the front ramp open and cargo coming up and down. The two systems are not interfering with each other.
Yeah, that was a
your
big
cargo
thing.
is more protected as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I guess, a key element of it, isn't it? Is not only having the like footfall into your marketplace, but these big trade items, you're going to need to deliver them.
Yep. So we're going to move on to so we've been looking at sort of functional images of basically explaining how we've been dealing with design decisions and how that's affected art. And so now we move on to the sort of the sexy stuff of looking at how we've taken the existing Banu materials, from the early merchantman, which there was a lot of good stuff on that, and then just progressing it a little bit further. And again, this is still probably this is subject to change still. It's previs, but in terms of where it's heading, it's really quite exciting. And so not everything is modelled in this, so there probably will be more folds in the metal, kind of like there is on the Defender. Where,
If you look at the concept images versus where it all ends up pivoting on those arms, there's a lot more detail.
There's a lot more, there's a lot more sort of intricate sort of folding of the metal, and so we're just kind of like working in. We're kind of sort of turning it into more. It is more ornate. It's more of a sort of a sort of special item essentially, and sort of really trying to sort of get that impression. So we're layering in the gold, we're layering in the sort of all the sort of Art Nouveau line work, sort of with a sort of Banu influence. we're looking at sort of taking materials like opal or whatever the star citizen equivalent is of that, and also integrating that into the ship. So it really is sort of a display of wealth. It's like if you've got this, like you're loaded.
Crown jewel of your fleet.
It is. So I think it's going in some really nice places, and so we're looking at this heavy bruiser of a turret, and this is still work in progress. Ideally there would be more work to do with this, and so we'd get more of the sort of curvature in the metalwork and stuff. But because we're on because of time scale and stuff, we've got to make some compromises. But we'll pass that information on.
I'm sure we'll have a good kick-off on this one. I like the turret on this one.
Yeah. So that's the exterior. We'll move on to the interior. Yes, we'll go over how it was, how it is, and then we'll go on a magical mystery tour
through the
up through
interior.
the ship.
Yeah. So it was a lot simpler, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Back in the day, it was pre-metric, so we didn't have all the requirements in place.
No components.
No components. The marketplace is a lot simpler in here, and so with Banu Merchantman 2.0, or in my head it's 3.0, we basically moved on to a fully upgraded interior roll drum. And so you can see from this cutaway, and it's kind of hard to show all the pathways in this ship. I feel like I'm banging this drum, but again, we did a lot of work on pathways and navigation. And so you can, as a trader, you're locked off to a certain route. As a crew, you've got access to everywhere. But as a trader, you're like, okay, well, you've got these areas you can get to. You can come in from the docking collar, and there's two different docking collars. There's
the larger
ship
one on
to
one
ship
side
and ship to station.
Yeah.
And then that funnels you into the marketplace. And then you can go back down through the flipper or vice versa, the fuel scoop. And so, in terms of what's changed, we've had to create space for the cargo. The hangar for the Defender, that was a massive one. So a lot of just shifting the internals around. There's two elevators in this. There's one for crew. There's one for traders. Again,
I think that kind of like builds on the experience of someone coming to buy stuff there, though, and to me that's kind of like part of the lure of the ship is that like you say the crew have their own everything set up, but the kind of like the people that are coming to spend money, that experience is like the kind of like one of the core elements of that ship. That's what makes it kind of so special.
A different experience to coming on board it that way versus living on board it and
totally
working on board.
And so we'll see here that these are like previs images. These are straight out of 3D Studio Max with a bit of Photoshop magic, but it's just giving you an idea of that going up the fuel scoop or the market entrance. You'll have the awnings all folded out. It should be a real grand experience. Will we have red carpet?
I kind of like I don't know why in my head it's like Aladdin's cave. Do you know what I mean? That's
totally.
what it kind of.
And we had some reference images as well.
Oh, okay.
For the marketplace, and so here you've walked up, and you're again. This is always in this concept theory. Has always been this tree of life essentially. So basically, you enter at the base of the tree, and then it forms the spine, and then that tree branches out and basically reaches to the front of the ship. That's the theory. That's always been this organic theory.
The same in the Defender. You come in the Defender up the ramp.
Yes.
And then you have that big central tree which houses components, and then that stretches out and back around to form.
So the line work in this is a little more sort of refined. It has gone less organic compared to the Defender. We've kind of gone for a slightly less alien feeling.
Yeah.
Just to
like doesn't feel like it's actually a tree that has grown and they build the ship around this kind of organic thing. It is a ship. Yeah,
absolutely. And so here is a capture from 3D Studio Max, just so it's super clear. Like this is the lower floor. So the marketplace is split into 2 floors, 8 shops on each floor.
Yeah. Or is it?
No, sorry, 4 shops.
4 shops
on each floor.
8 total.
And then you have this little walkway that sort of goes over the top. You can kind of see here, obviously, we've got a flying jellyfish. But the theory is that that'll be a holographic display, and hopefully the captain can choose what's on there.
Yeah.
Special offer for the day.
Could be special offer, could show a weapon, could just have like butterflies flying around, whatever. But this really gives you a vibe of the complexity of the Banu sort of folded metal, that organicness, and sort of just that overall experience.
The headaches that you're going to cause me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that Aladdin's cave.
Yeah.
You've got the little jewels hanging off the.
I really like those, though, the kind of like the treatment of light in a lot of concepts. I don't know, I'm stealing your thunder from future thing. Yeah, but the sort of these jewels and stones that are kind of going to be used as light source throughout the ship, and I think that's kind of like really nice.
Yeah.
Just something a bit different.
Fluorescent tube.
Yeah, LED lights or.
Yeah, and so we really sort of pushed on that on this one, and so here is like. There's basically, as part of the tree of life in the marketplace, is the elevator shaft, and so you can then go up there into the negotiation room, which was in the original.
One of the images that everyone remembers from the original concept was that room with the table and looking out over the cargo.
And so we've kind of kept that, and we'll come to that in a second. But before you get there, you come out of the elevator and you're sort of in a central corridor, which also leads to guests' habitation rooms.
In law, these trades often take a long amount of time, so there was a lot of back and forth with the narrative team on this ship in particular, with how do Banu trade, how do they eat, how do they, because for the Defender it was sort of very small scale, but it's long duration, so these trades can take days, weeks, maybe months. So the people that are coming on board to trade need a place to stay whilst.
And it's not like the people that are going to be kind of flying this. They don't have in my head they don't have like a base of operations. Like this is their home.
Yeah.
So like you say, if you're trading I guess some of these things could be their livelihood. They're trading these really expensive high-end items, and that's kind of.
And you want them to feel special. Like the thing about this always has been. Making the people feel, that they're in something quite unique. And so you can see here, in this image we've got massive gemstones. There could be whatever, but, in terms of lighting opportunities, you'll have the core sticks and the light, if they're rotating. There's a lot of cool opportunities. And so here is the conference room, which we just mentioned. In the original concept, it was smaller, a lot more compact, but obviously the ship has got bigger and therefore we've got more space. But also, it's a display of wealth, right? If you can afford to waste a bit of space, essentially, if you could be like, I don't need to pack it with everything, I just got to make this nice player experience where everyone feels sort of relaxed. And so that's kind of what we've been pushing with. So there's a lot of commonality that we've taken from the original and fed into this, but then also pushing further. So again, you can see the sort of like carved gemstones inlaid with more gemstones, inlaid with gold. And so again, in terms of player experience, it's going to be totally different to anything that's happened. And we've still kept that viewpoint looking into the hangar. So
the cargo bay.
Sorry, into the cargo bay. And so it's been quite a tussle trying to get everything into place. And then this is an example of one of the hubs for like if you're doing long-term trading. And this is really sort of based on, again, keeping with the organic theme, the Banu shapes, but pushing in a slightly different palette and materials. And so it's kind of based off of the interior of a Nautilus shell. And so you can't really tell from here, but actually it circles back on itself. So there's a little internal wall there that you go behind, and that's where toilet and shower and all that sort of stuff is. And then you've got the bed in the back, and then you've got lockers and little seating area. So you kind of like a real sort of organic journey. So again, just pushing on leveraging that Xi'an tech as well, so the chairs and the desk and even the lights are just sort of held in space. So quite different. And so that's where the traders go, but
Yeah.
the crew obviously has got access to the full ship. And so,
Slightly less grandiose, but not.
yeah, so the docking cargo, that docking corridor is still quite elaborate. But
That's going to be shared between.
yeah, it's more of a shared space. There's some more technical elements in there in terms of venting and stuff. And we still want to, this has always been a theory of you've got your superstructure, then you've got your tech, and then you've got your layering of the bodywork, the cladding, yeah. And then, there'll be areas where the sort of tech is revealed and stuff. And so by balancing those two, the proportions, you can kind of like alter the feel of the space. And so, I mean, it's going to be a journey for you guys of like how we achieve all this. But this is the corridor leading to the marketplace from the docking area, and so you've got that great big green ring, which kind of sort of that we kind of put that there and kind of thinking of it shows green when it's safe.
Yeah.
The docking, there's not some kind of
Yeah,
ventage
actually,
going on.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with the team this week actually about that exact thing, about kind of communicating to the player, but not in just as simple as something flashing on a screen or whatever else, but just having something a little bit more elegant.
So I think again this will give you some really good opportunities, and again it's just the new materials, the folds, and moving on to the habitation section where sort of crew can go. People who are familiar with the Defender will really sort of see the sort of common thread here. So the amount of gold and shiny stuff, to put it bluntly, is reduced, and so it goes to more matte materials. It's a little less display of wealth. It's a little more functional, but still got that 3D printed.
You're getting a lot of that sort of like layering in here as well, aren't you?
Yeah. And that in the middle is what do we call it? The magic tagine.
Yeah.
Ultimately, so it's fed from underneath, and you choose what you want, and then it appears, and the top comes off, and you get your food out.
Yeah.
And you get your cutlery.
You can speak to narrative for a while about sort of how our aliens eat. That could be a whole talk in itself, I feel.
It's a tricky one because it's an alien, it's a Banu ship, but it's got to support humans operating it. If you had an entirely Banu crew, if you were playing as a Banu, then some aspects of this you don't need, but as humans you do.
The Banu would they cater for both, don't they?
Yeah. And so a lot of complex stuff to sort of get our heads around. Engineering, this is a work in progress shot.
It's one of my favourite bits though. I really like this.
And you can't really tell from this shot, but it's essentially set over 3 levels. You've got that main middle level, and you can sort of get on mini lifts to drop down to components or walk up the stairs to some elevated stuff. But essentially this is leading to the main central engine, and that is like sort of counter-rotating all those elements. And so you get this awesome shadow play basically going on in the room, like really sort of cinematic.
Looks extremely cool in motion.
And if we can tie it to either were you talking about whether tying it to damage or the state of the
It sounds like
engine?
a good idea, so I'm going to say yes.
So if the engine's malfunctioning and it's sort of slowing down and stuff, that'd be kind of cool.
I'll claim that one.
Okay,
I'm not sure it was, but it's fine.
And then in terms of the cargo space, what we're looking at here is like the 32 SCU sort of cargo boxes.
These are the big cargo containers that you see in all the rest stops and the cargo decks. These are those, like the modern day big shipping containers.
Yeah.
They're quite hefty, and you certainly can't pick them up by yourself, and you can't really do it with handheld tractor beams. You need something big.
Yes, and so we've got a hefty a moving mechanism in there at the moment, which you can control from this position that you can see in the screenshot. And so that'll be something else to work out, Ben. But
something else to work out, John.
But it will be a really cool area, and sort of just below you, that's basically where the sort of the loading platform is.
Yeah, because it moves the cargo containers into that space, and then that space
drops
kind of drops down, doesn't it? Yeah, so there will be that sort of like oh, I need the bottom one on the third
Yes,
stack. All right, okay,
yeah.
let's shift everything out. And
There is that sort of mini game of Jenga almost with how you're gonna access stuff, and all the time you'll be able to see from the negotiation room
the poor guy moving it around, trying
Yeah.
to don't mess it up. But yeah, as a result of all those changes, the cargo capacity has gone down a little. I think it was a nebulous number to start with that had never really been proved
Still
out.
pretty
It's still
big.
big, so
Yeah.
it's around 2,800, which is not a small amount of cargo by any means.
Yeah.
So it's still well above most ships, but until you get to the hull series,
I was going to say, I can't remember what our whole series.
the hull is over 3,000, so it's
Well, but still, yeah.
it's a lot,
Plenty.
but maybe not quite as much as people were hoping for originally.
Although I think
It looks
maybe
pretty though.
It does.
the loss of cargo, but you're gaining so much more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So
it's always a give and take with these things. Of we could make every ship do everything, but then they just become these humongous vessels. So it's always a trade.
So moving now up to the bridge area, and what we're looking at here is very much work in progress. I mean, we are literally working on this right now. In the sort of top left, had to think then, is an image that we created sort of on round 2, and we're sort of leveraging that heavily. So a lot of those shapes will appear into this new stuff, but in this new sort of configuration, you're able to access the bridge, but you're also able to access the remote, not the manned turret. It's more of an experience, and then also you've got side corridors which leads you to.
It's got a special name though.
It's like it's not a meditation room. I can't remember the name of it.
There was a approved name, wasn't there?
Yeah.
I can't think what it is.
It's kind of like a sort of sacred space where sort of the Banu can sort of pay. We've kind of got sort of equivalent of prayer wheels. That's kind of the theory. So it's like this nice little calm space. So that's been quite fun. So there's a lot of the areas on this ship are very sort of multi-threaded. You often have your central area and then stuff coming off it. So like I said, there's been a lot of thought given to navigation, and in this area also are two lifts which also can take you quickly to other areas from this bridge.
It's an 8-person crew now, so there's space for 4 on the bridge. Obviously, there's 4 stations there. You have 1 person that can go to the manned turrets towards the rear, 1 person that can fly the defender, and that leaves 2 to deal with everything else whilst you're flying around, because you can still trade whilst flying around, but it's probably not the wisest of ideas if the person who's come on board to trade has left their ship behind. So
I mean, it might be good for negotiations.
Yeah, good for negotiations.
Yeah.
But that 8 crew can then fill the 8 shops if you're just landed on a planet somewhere. You pull double duty. You don't need to be flying if you landed. You can man your shop, or you can let 1 person do double duty in shops.
Yep. This is an example, well, a full-size image of that round 2 concept of the bridge, and again you can see the sort of the superstructure and all the layering basically. So we have changed the configuration since this image, but a lot of that theory is going to get transposed onto this new one. Same with the materials, and again just continuing with that flow of from back to front, basically always sort of this tree of life and going to the nose of the ship.
By the time people see this, we'll have
We would have.
actually had someone start.
Yeah, that's true.
Start working on it.
Yeah.
So it's actually in production now after all these years.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
So,
This is actually one of the ships that I'm really excited about kind of playing with in game. It's just such a kind of, like I say, it's got that kind of full trading experience, but it feels like a proper home that you can live on, and it's got a load of weaponry as well, which
Yeah.
if in doubt, then just
yeah,
get the guns out.
yeah, you will buy it.
You will buy this. So that was the Merchantman. Pretty cool. Looking forward to seeing that go into production,
Yeah, me
go
too.
through production, because it's, by the time people see it, it will be in production.
Yep.
So to close our talk out, thought we would revisit the idea that we had last time we did one of these panels. We showed some concept ships, or some ideas for concept ships, talked about it, and everyone voted for them. Obviously, as this is pre-recorded segment, we can't interact with the crowd and get a feel of that. So
Fight amongst ourselves.
arm wrestle for which one we do.
Yeah, I don't think I would.
So
It's not good, Terry.
at the end, Jared will explain how you can sort of vote or express your preference for what we show today, and we will see what comes of that. But first, let's go over what we did last time. So we had this ground mining vehicle concept. We had the Xi'an small cargo. We had the Tavaran light fighter. People may recognise a sort of a pattern emerging here. And then a small refinery ship. So let's see what's happened to those over the last few years. So that small ground miner turned into the Greycat Rock and the Rock DS. The Gatak Raylan was the Xi'an small cargo, and that was very close to that concept thumbnail that we did.
It was, wasn't it?
We have the Asperia Talon, which was the Talon light fighter. And then the fourth one, which is a bit of a mystery.
A mystery.
A mystery.
I like
Forced
this because
pun.
I wasn't involved with this last time, but you've got a couple of my favourite ships in that, so yeah, it's good.
Read your mind in the future.
Yeah, yeah.
So that fourth one, the small refinery ship, obviously people don't know about, but I can pretty confidently say people will know about it very soon, fingers crossed. So, it's a new year, we'll do it all again. We've got 4 more sort of cuts of options here, so we go over those. Option A is a big explorer ship, so we obviously have the Charakteres, the pinnacle of explorer ships, but there can always be more.
Yeah, it would be nice to get a bit of competition in for the character, really.
Yeah, maybe something misky. We'll go in the misc line.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm down for that.
Then we have a selection of ground vehicles there. So there's a right mismatch there. So we've got 2 little small vehicles and what looks like an APC based off the ballista chassis. They all look cool.
Yeah, the ground vehicles are kind of, although they're not as grand and exciting as the ships, I think they're just really fun. And it's nice. They're nice things to work on because they are kind of contained and they are quite small. They are, I was going to say like less complex, but they're probably not that much less complex than a ship because they still require all the same sort of setup and everything else.
Yeah.
And the confinement.
Yeah,
Everything
you
still
got to
has
fit
to
everything
work.
in a small space. But I think the ground vehicles kind of they just add that extra element of fun when you are playing with your friends. That it's you know, it's not all just about space. We've got some beautiful planets and being able to explore them not by foot is good.
Yeah.
I don't see a floating noodle wagon there though.
Floating.
Floating noodle bike, that's still on the list. Yeah,
It's on my
PJ
list.
special, yeah.
Or
I've
maybe-
got a few that I'm trying to like just wear John down with.
Maybe option C, this hover vehicle could be a floating Big Benny's
Well,
Delivery bike,
delivery quad
Yeah.
bike.
yeah.
could be.
You'd go to like flying green zones though, wouldn't you? And that'd be like all actual kind of landing zones would be all sorts of difficulties.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, so that's we have some Gravlev bikes in game at the moment, but this is a sort of a more stable, secure option because anyone that's flown Gravlev bikes has experienced probably some mild terror as they try and do
It's
turns.
been a while since we've done.
Yeah, we've not done I'm trying to think when the last proper Gravlev vehicle was.
Well, I mean,
Don't know.
Nox.
I mean,
Yeah,
all
the
yeah,
Nox, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's been a while.
Yeah.
So the last option D, is a bomber ship. So we have the Hercules A2, which is coming this patch. That obviously carries very big bombs,
very
or it's a collection of smaller
yeah,
bombs,
some very
but
big bombs.
it is our only dedicated ground bomber. We have bombers like the Retaliator and Eclipse for them, or torpedoes. This would be another single man, get in, get out, drop your bombs, job. So
Nice.
I know I've kind of said I like all of them, but for like I think the visual aesthetics of the bombers is kind of like the single seat bomber. They just look cool.
I think the hover vehicle for me.
Yeah.
I'll go for the Explorer ship at the start because I like big ships. I cannot lie.
Do you know, I was wondering if you were going to do it, and you
It was
did.
going in my head.
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
was like, do I stop with this? No.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a nice big explorer ship that you can have all your friends on board, because that's really where you have the huge amount of fun with Star Citizen,
Yeah.
is getting a group of friends together and just going off
I just think
and causing chaos.
visually the small little kind of compacts are cool.
Can we have them all, John?
Maybe.
I guess we'll
Well,
find
what
out.
happens if we do get like a perfect split on the votes?
Yeah.
Like Jazz will come back to be like, well, actually,
Definitely don't condone trying to split the votes.
yeah.
So we have to make them all. But
Just double your team, Ben. Double the team.
it could happen.
Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, thanks.
So yeah, that's a little wrap up at the end of the show. So obviously it would have been easier to do this in person, but the world we live in doesn't allow that at the moment.
Hopefully next year, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Jared will come on in a minute and explain how to vote for these. Leave your comments and suggestions on them, and we'll see what happens. That's a wrap for us. I'm John, if you don't realise. I'm the vehicle director.
I'm Ben. First CitizenCon done. Woo. Yeah.
Yeah, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
And I'm Paul Jones, art director.
And thanks for watching our Ship Talk panel.
Do you hunger for the challenge? Pitted against nature, you will need discipline, determination, and the courage to never give up. Looks like you need a beer, mate.
This is Nova AI. Application accepted. Report to Everest Harbor.
Welcome to Nova. Today you can join one of our 5 branches. Nova Core. Specializing in industry and commerce. Nova Skyline. Recreational activities and public relations. Nova Defense. Aggressive negotiations and security management. Nova Relief. Our medical aid and first responders. And Nova Frontiers, the science and exploration branch. The future is in your hands.
Universe, where a hardened reaver on the edge of civilization soothes his loneliness on the spectrum.
But I'm too old to find love. That is a load of space whale crap, and you know it.
Where a slaver in the heart of Cathcart meets new people every day, but just can't find that someone special.
I can't handle it anymore, Maurice. I'm leaving. But who will subjugate your slaves if you leave?
Perhaps a little magic can happen in the cold vacuum space. From the producers of Replace Me comes a romantic comedy with a pirate's heart of gold, Sleepless in Stanton. Coming soon to the Spectrum on Cathcart Public Access.
We build more than money could afford and grow beyond what would define power.
We venture into the future and stand together in unity.
We are the Galactic Union.
Welcome back. You're watching CitizenCon 2951. Just in case you saw the Benny Merchantman and lost all sense of time, space, and reality there. That was the ship talk presentation, followed by another set of community videos. So the 400i is real and visible. The Anvil Liberator may become the hero of Pyro when players are left without all the gas stations everywhere. And the Banu Merchantman aims to take the crowd of coolest spacecraft in the game. Like it didn't have it already. Plus, you can vote to prioritize one of the next ships to move into development. Voting should be enabled now on the very special comm link found on the robertsspaceindustries.com website. And if it isn't, give it some time. I'm willing to bet the site is being hammered just a little bit at the moment. Now, as for what you folks had to say during the presentation, we're going to try this again. All right, Twitch chat, don't let me down. Dial Tone said, "Yo, dog, we heard you like ships, so we made a ship to ship your ships, so you can ship while you ship." Ora Valido said, "They're shipping the shipping shippings. Been enjoying CitizenCon a lot. Thanks for the amazing work." Medusa01 says, "It's so stupid. I love it." I don't know which ship he's talking about, but we'll take it. Enigmarin says, "The new most important ship in Star Citizen." That's still me and Jay Lee, dude. Blix88 says, "Pocket carrier." Yes, finally, pocket carrier. And Lars19 says, "Balloon Merchunkman!" I asked for the best of the best, and they gave me Lars19. Back to the 400i, that promotion should have launched just a little while ago, so be sure you check that out, as well as the pre-Q&A FAQ, where the community team anticipated some of your most likely questions and put them to John Crew ahead of time. I hope there's at least one question about the bathrooms there. Now, of course, what we really want to do is fly the 400i. And I'm pleased to report that the 400i is not only straight to flyable, but will be available when Alpha 315 goes to PTU for Wave 1 testers, subscribers, and concierge. And as for when that is, I'm told the platform team is literally watching this stream right now, waiting for me to say the word, and they will drop the patch. So all I have to do is say the word. Whew. That's a lot of pressure. But if I say the word and the patch drops, then they'll leave. And I'll be here by myself. Why would I want that? You know, this reminds me of the time when I had that big crazy beard that I said I would shave when 3.0 came out. And then right before 3.0 came out, everybody was on the Go Live call, and everybody was like, "Yeah, it's ready, yeah, it's ready, yeah, it's ready." And then CR made everybody wait an additional 5 minutes just to torture me. You remember that, CR? Pepperidge Farms remembers that. All right, I've pushed the gag too far, as it seems. All right, here we go. Countdown ready. And 3, 2, 1, go. That was predictable. All right. Let's go now to Allie Brown, Christopher Bolte, and Daryl Barnes, and learn more about Gen 12 and the multi-core of Vulcan.
Hi, I'm Ali Brown, Director of Graphics Engineering here at Cloud Imperium Games, and today we're going to be talking about Gen 12, our new multi-core renderer. In addition to myself, we'll also be hearing from Christopher Bolte, our core engine architect, and Daryl Barnes, our graphics programmer. And today we're going to be talking about the need for our new renderer, the architecture and how it's built, Vulcan, which is the back-end API we use, and the progress of how we're doing so far, and then what's next for the graphics team. So to help understand the need for the Gen 12 renderer, I first want to take a look at the high-level structure of our existing renderer to try and understand how the new render will differ. So here you see a diagram, very simplified, of our overall architecture. And on the left-hand side, you can see the 3D engine, and this is what manages all the visible objects in the scene, for example, their position, their size, and ultimately is responsible for the culling of them objects and deciding what should be sent through on screen each frame to the renderer. And obviously, the job of the renderer is just to feed out the image at the end of the frame. And to do this, to manage this process, all of these objects have to pass through this single universal pipe, this conduit of information in the center. And as a result of that, every object has to come through with a certain amount of settings or paperwork and baggage to describe how they should be configured, and it's type of represented on the diagram by these switches. So this type of design initially seems very flexible. Having this universal pipe, you can very easily toggle certain settings and get a very different rendered result for each object. But the reality is actually that the objects and the renderer both end up extremely complicated because they have to decipher this list of instructions and distribute these objects through the various pipelines and stages inside the renderer. And this has to happen for every object, every frame, and this deciphering ends up resulting in quite a significant performance problem. And it also makes the renderer quite inflexible because it's quite complicated and hard to change the architecture. So how does our Gen 12 renderer differ from this? Well, the methodology we're taking on is to try and make everything as explicit as possible. And we're trying to minimize all these redundant connections and switches and configuration options and try and get things much more streamlined. So to do this, each object in the world will directly communicate with the render path responsible for drawing that object at startup time. So when the object is first spawned, it will communicate directly with the path responsible for it and pre-configure everything possible at that stage. Now, this has a bunch of benefits. So by speaking directly to the thing that's rendering it, it doesn't have to worry about all the other rendering systems. So we end up with a much more limited set of parameters, both on the object and on the rendering pass. And all of the settings we do have are very relevant for the task, which makes things much less complicated. And it's easier to optimize, more flexible, and more modular. So each of these passes then goes on to generate lower-level commands that are actually going to map directly to our graphics API, which is the piece of software that sits just above your GPU driver. And this backend collects and executes all of these instructions. And because there is no high-level knowledge of the rendering in this backend, it is just simply just issuing commands. It ends up very simple and streamlined and much simpler than the equivalent on our old renderer. So the benefit of this simpler code is it's much easier to multi-thread, which is to say to run it on multiple CPU cores in parallel, something that is crucial for modern CPUs. So multi-threading is a complex and often misunderstood paradigm, so I thought it was worth us talking briefly about how we optimize multi-threaded code. And for that, I'm going to use an analogy of building a house, which is another complex engineering task with dependencies. So here you can see a list of tasks for a builder, a joiner, and an electrician, all running one after another, and there's dependencies between them shown in red. And in this example, the house is equivalent to rendering our frame. Each tradesman might be a different system, and then the capacity of 3 people in our house is equivalent to the 3 CPU cores we might have on our system. And the occupancy, as in the average number of people in the house, is effectively the same as the CPU or GPU utilization numbers you might see in Task Manager. So in this example, we can see the project takes 11 units of time and is on average 60% full for this house. Now, this occupancy of 60% isn't the direct reason that it takes 11 units of time, and that is in fact down to the critical path of work where the builder is blocking the joiner and the joiner is then blocking the electrician. So the obvious answer here is that you need another builder or multiple builders to work on this in parallel to unblock the joiner, and so on. You can keep on parallelizing this work to try and reduce the critical path, and that is our focus when we're optimizing multi-threaded code. However, not all tasks are trivial to run in parallel, and sometimes it's impossible to actually run them in parallel, so you'll end up with these unallocated capacity space and these bubbles. And in this case, if we imagine the electrician was in fact our GPU, then the fact that it takes longer is just going to result in a CPU bubble, which is unavoidable. And this type of thing happens very frequently if you have a configuration, for example, a very fast GPU and a very slow CPU, then unavoidably one of them 2 systems is going to have a bubble. So we can fill these bubbles with non-critical work like streaming meshes or textures, and this can help fill the unused CPU capacity. And this can be useful to try and get some extra work done, but ultimately it's not going to improve the performance of the frame. And the point I really wanted to drive home was that the CPU and GPU utilization, which are often looked at as key indicators of performance, aren't actually the direct thing we should be looking at. They are useful as statistics, but ultimately the frame time is the only thing that matters and the critical path that resulted in that frame time. So as we roll out Gen 12, we'll hopefully be putting some new statistics in there that the players can see to help them understand the performance and understand these bubbles, and that should hopefully give a little bit clearer insight into the performance of the renderer. So how we can actually achieve this parallelism in practice, that's going to come down to two major changes. One is the architectural changes, which Christopher will talk us through, and the second is the Vulkan graphics API that Darryl is going to talk us through.
Welcome to the next section of our Gen 12 renderer presentation. My name is Christopher Bolte, core engine architect here at Cloud Imperium Games, and I would like to spend the next few minutes introducing the high-level architecture of our in-development Gen 12 renderer. For this section, I will focus on the rendering of object instances in the world, for example chairs, walls, characters or spaceships. This part of the rendering pipeline is called scene object rendering and has the largest impact on runtime performance. There's also a lot of work happening on the architecture to manage operations which work on all pixels on the screen, so-called post effects, but I won't cover those. The current slide shows our existing renderer code setup. We have a main thread, which does all game simulation as well as figuring out what objects we should draw for every frame. And we have a render thread, which takes all those objects and translates their description into GPU commands to render them on the screen. The system is set up to double buffer the data. In other words, the render thread is working on data from the previous frame, while the main thread produces data for the next frame. Such a setup allows easy performance improvements in some situations, but it also has two issues on modern hardware. First, the rendering code won't scale over multiple CPU cores, which can result in a bottleneck during execution. In other words, every visible object adds a certain cost. The more objects we render, the higher the cost. And as a single CPU processes this cost, no matter how well we optimize, at some object count we will run into performance issues. Second, since the main thread and render thread must be synchronized with vsync, we can end up with very bad load balancing. As shown in the slide, if the main thread takes longer than the render thread has to be idle and wait, and vice versa, if the render thread takes longer, then the main thread has to wait. During such wait time, the CPU is underutilized, especially if waiting for the single core render thread. One goal for the Gen 12 renderer is to remove this kind of bottleneck and instead architecture the system without those waits and allowing every operation to utilize all CPU cores. When we utilize all CPU cores, we would still have an object limit, as every visible object must be processed. But we can process a higher object count and at the same time reduce the latency on the main thread until all objects are processed, as we will be making better use of modern multi-core CPUs. Let's take a look at some details. For example, please keep in mind that the size of the sections are chosen to visualize the cost. Relation in size doesn't necessarily translate to the same relation in CPU cost. When looking at the cost of the operations done by the render thread, a pattern quickly emerges. We pay a similar cost for every rendered object. This is called a draw call. For every draw call, some time that is spent inside our own renderer code and some part of it is spent in the GPU driver code. In the next slide, we will cover our current process as well as the next steps to move the draw call cost out of the render thread onto multiple CPU cores. We already have a level of parallelization on the main thread, used to find out what objects are visible. There we use our batch worker job system. This is a parallelization system to execute the same code on a different object instance over all CPU cores. To give an example, checking 400 objects can be split over 10 threads, so that every thread will be processed 40 objects. By doing that, the latency on the main thread until all 400 objects are done is divided by the number of threads, reducing said latency to 40 objects only. Roughly at least. As in the actual system, several low-level factors affect the execution, making this statement not fully true, but covering those would be out of scope for this presentation. The visible check itself happens multiple times per object in a frame, as an object can be visible in the main camera, but it can also be visible in shadows, or via remote location rendering. the so-called render-to-texture or RTT rendering. The slides show those pairs as simplified, as we can have more than one shadow pairs, for example. Those visibility checks or culling operations are performed in all CPU cores with the batch worker system. When an object is determined to be visible, its rendering description is copied into multiple temporary buffers. Those temporary buffers are processed on the next render thread frame to submit every object's draw call to the GPU. In other words, object culling is already at the point where we want to have the draw call processing. Right now, we are in the first implementation phase. We have defined our low-level code building blocks, ensured our APIs work, and are now in the process of moving our own rendering code out of the render thread into the existing batch worker execution. This is a very time-consuming refactoring, as we need to change every rendering feature in a very old and large code base. But we have set it up in a way to allow us to gradually move over parts step by step. After this operation is done, we still copy state to a temporary buffer to be processed by the render thread. But the state which we copy is prepared in a way that we can directly send it to the GPU with minimal processing on the render thread. Doing this step will already give us performance benefits when we are render thread bound, as less code will be run on the render thread. Additionally, this is a necessary stepping stone for the next phase. After we manage to move our own rendering code to multiple CPU cores, we will start to utilize the Vulkan API. One major selling point of the newest generation of graphics APIs like Vulkan is the possibility to generate GPU commands on multiple threads. That is something which wasn't possible before, and mostly the cause for the existing renderer design. The catch is, to allow efficient parallel generation of GPU commands, the data must be prepared in a certain way. And that is what we are doing right now as part of porting the scene object rendering to Gen 12 and moving our renderer code to the batch worker system. When this is done, we can implement the parallel Vulkan backend and remove the render thread. After all that work is done, our renderer should be able to process a very high number of visible objects at lower impact on the frame time. At the same time, it will make better use of the available CPU resources and have less idle time when major systems wait for each other. Thank you for your time. Daryl will now take over to cover the Vulkan side of the Gen 12 renderer.
Hi, my name is Daryl. I'm a graphics programmer here at Cloud Imperium Games, and I work closely with Vulkan and our graphics renderer to make the game look as good as it does. So what exactly is Vulkan? Well, Vulkan is a modern graphics API that allows us as developers to take greater control over what you as a player sees and also affects performance greatly. As you know, we already have a few areas of bottlenecking on the CPU, but the design of Vulkan allows us to alleviate these bottlenecks by submitting work in parallel to the GPU. So I would like to explain a bit more about the software stack that's involved with our graphics in the engine. So from the image, you can see that we have a renderer front end, a renderer back end, and as well the graphics driver. The Vulkan API generally sits at the renderer back end and allows us a fine-grained control over what we develop and how we develop for it. It also gives us flexibility for cross-platform, including Windows and Linux, and anything we may want to look at in the future. The graphics driver stage is not managed by us, but we look at that and we gather information and process any crashes or any issues that might happen, and then we can deal with those further down the line. So you can see now how graphics APIs have changed over time. We're of course in the more modern section where Vulkan is on feature parity, essentially, with other APIs such as DirectX 12 Ultimate. You might also be wondering what a graphics API actually is, and we see that as a tool that is used for development that can interface between your graphics card as a player and us as developers so that we can give you the latest and greatest. Vulkan also has many features and extensions available to it that we will be exploring in the future, such as variable rate shading, bindless resources, and GPU-accelerated ray tracing. To address any issues, we also need to collect data from our players